At 3:18 a.m. on January 19th, 2026, inside the Melitopol power substation, the entire area was still sleeping in that false, late-night quiet. The transformers hummed like a chained beast, pushing electricity that kept streetlights, logistics depots, and communications alive, and, most importantly, kept the heating systems running. In the control room, a Russian technician took a hard swig of vodka, eyes glued to a monitor flickering like a failing control panel. "Just snow. False alarms," he muttered. But it wasn't interference. Ukraine had the target locked for 97 minutes, timing patrol rhythms and that exact moment during a shift change. And when the second hand slipped past a point no one noticed, the countdown began. In 68 seconds, parts of Melitopol's grid would go from stable to silent. No loud airstrike needed. Just one precise touch triggering a domino effect. And the cold would surge in like an invisible blockade. All of it. Paid for by a UAV package worth only a few tens of thousands of dollars cheaper than an old car. Yet enough to turn an ordinary night into a night the entire system would remember. But how did Ukraine slip through the air defense net around Melitopol? The answer wasn't a miracle. It was a fatal mistake. Russia assumed the blizzard would automatically shield everything. On the radar screen, there was nothing left but smears of interference and faint flashes swallowed by the freezing wind. Just weather, the duty crew reassured themselves, and in that exact moment, a gap opened. Because those traces weren't birds blown off course searching for shelter in the snowstorm. High above, a UJ-22 airborne mother UAV silently circled within the snowfall, carrying 3 FPV Wild Hornets. 15-pound killers with 5 BC, 4 warheads capable of melting through 2 feet of concrete at roughly 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. The UJ-22 didn't win with speed. It won with patience and calculation. Enough payload to carry the required strike package, locking in its cover with a cold plan instead of relying on luck. And on Russia's side, the network was anything but cheap. An S-400 system worth hundreds of millions of dollars, backed by short-range layers like Pantsir S-1 and Tor M2, always on alert. But that night, the entire system was staring down the risk of being humiliated by a far cheaper UAV package, something once dismissed as flying scrap metal. One moment of complacency in a blizzard lit the fuse for the chain of events, and just 4 hours later, the Melitopol substation entered its darkest hour. High above, a UJ-22 airborne mother UAV silently circled within the snowfall, carrying 4 FPV Wild Hornets. A secret bunker near Dnipropetrovsk buzzed like a beehive just before the sortie. This wasn't a reckless move, but a mission meticulously planned down to the second. The UJ-22 airborne, Ukraine's marvel, roared and shot into the sky with an operational range of roughly 500 miles. Inside it sat a Rotax 912 engine. Rugged, practical, the kind of dependable workhorse you'd find in the small two-seaters parked at quiet suburban airfields. The type that can run all day without complaining. Beneath its belly hung 3 FPV Wild Hornets, bundled into a single package of near-threshold chaos, just shy of its maximum payload. And instead of climbing high to show off its strength, the UJ-22 chose to fly low. At around 124 miles per hour, it pressed itself into the terrain at roughly 100 feet, slipping under radar sweeps like a driver who knows every shortcut. Not taking the highway where the patrols circle, but threading through dark, low back roads that are hard to spot from a distance. So why play hide and seek with a $500 million S-400 system? Because Ukraine is about to play its trump card. The Blizzard detective tactic isn't a reckless gamble. It's a master move calculated down to the smallest detail. Ukraine's AI grinds through NOAA satellite data like someone opening Google Maps to find a shortcut through bad weather. And it picks the perfect moment. A snowstorm with roughly 40 miles per hour, crosswinds, and a 6-inch blanket of snow, thick enough to blur thermal signatures and scramble radar returns. In that window, Russia's Nebo M radar, already disadvantaged against low-flying targets, is about to be outplayed by a drone package worth only around $20,000. While Moscow dreams of a warm winter, Ukraine turns snow into a startup-style secret weapon. Cheap, smart, and aimed straight at the blind spot. And as Russia's air defense layers reassure themselves that it's just the weather, the UJ-22 makes its first move like a literal checkmate. This isn't just a drone. It's a white cloak specter inside the whiteout, scattering Nebo M's radar waves until they shatter and drift like confetti in the storm. In a control room in Odessa, the Ukrainian crew kept channel hopping the 5G data link, tuning the frequency up to 1,500 times per second to slip past jamming waves from Russia's Krassikov 4 electronic warfare system. Picture it as the military version of switching on active noise canceling on a Bose Quiet Comfort Ultra. Outside, an entire sea of electronic static can be pouring down, but the drone's link still filters out what matters most. Russia can pump out non-stop interference to scramble the signal, but to the drone it collapses into a thin layer of noise, like a faint hiss buried in the background. Looking across to the other side of the front line, it's not hard to see why Russia dares to arrogantly declare this area impenetrable. At the outer early warning layer, Russia has the Resonance NE radar, with an ultra-long detection range of up to around 685 miles designed to catch difficult targets like hypersonic or stealth platforms. In the air, Su-30 SM-2 patrol flights run continuously, relying on the N-35 Urbis radar and a powerful propulsion system to maintain control. On the ground, Panzer S-1 batteries stand on alert with a large missile loadout, ready to turn any drone into prey within seconds. At the command post of the Melitopol substation, Commander Polar Bear R looks at his $500 million S-400 system and smiles with confidence. In his mind, this winter is an absolute advantage. The blizzard will blind the enemy, while Russia's air defense fortress will lock targets and shoot down anything that dares to enter. But the problem is this: they're betting security on something like an IBM system, 360 mainframe, in military form, powerful, capable, but rigid in the face of a new kind of tactic. The S-400's 92 N6E radar can track hundreds of targets, yet it has a fatal weakness: chaotic low-altitude clutter, especially in heavy snow in turbulent weather. Near-ground noise trails blend into the blizzard, making the boundary between a real target and weather dangerously vague. Russia has been self-satisfied for too long with its own invincible story. They haven't truly upgraded their thinking and procedures to deal with threats flying below 200 feet in blizzard conditions. Polar Bear R mutters, "Nothing gets through this storm without being detected." And that belief is the most dangerous gap of all. While Russia believes the S-400 is a volcano that can incinerate anything passing by, Ukraine sees it as a pot of hot water slowly cooling in the middle of winter. A powerful system, but losing its edge precisely because of the very thing they trust as a natural wall protecting them. And on the other side, Ukraine doesn't fight the blizzard, they use the blizzard. They turn snow into a shield, turn clutter into cover, and patiently exploit every weakness Russia is unknowingly exposing. About 210 miles from the Russian border, the UJ-22 reached its first checkpoint. While Russian radars were still distracted chasing shadow targets generated by decoy effects, Ukraine launched the decisive move. The belly bay of the UJ-22 mothership snapped open, releasing a Wild Hornet FPV into the storm. But instead of sprinting straight toward the strike target like you'd expect, the FPV climbed to around 600 feet and transmitted a sophisticated ghost echo signal, simulating the radar signature of more than 70 large objects swirling chaotically through heavy snowfall. The S-400's processors, built to filter out natural clutter like birds in bad weather, immediately started to choke. They burned valuable processing cycles, tracking targets that didn't exist. This is the core of the blizzard detective tactic, using experience and brutal winter conditions to turn Russia's strength into a weakness. Meanwhile, the UJ-22 stayed low, flying under 100 feet, exploiting dense snow to scatter radar waves. Data from the NOAA AI system helped it read and ride the storm's turbulent wind flows, keeping its route stable and precise even in near whiteout conditions. Up front, the FPV's frequency-hopping link all but laughed at Krassikov 4 jamming attempts, while inertial navigation kept it locked on course. Ukraine once again proved it can find an advantage in any environment. A $20,000 drone can outplay a $500 million air defense system with unsettling ease. On Russian radar screens, it looked like an endless game of hide-and-seek against digital ghosts. In the blinding white storm, the Ukrainian drone moved like a heatless predator present, but impossible to seize. Russian radar wasn't just fooled, it was effectively blinded and led by the nose. So, what do you think? Can Russia actually stop these drones? Drop your prediction in the comments. What method would they use to break through this kind of tactic? 68 seconds of radio silence began. Ukraine's original plan suddenly hit turbulence. The snowstorm, once an ally, intensified. Thicker snowfall started degrading the UJ-22's GPS reception, pushing its flight path off the programmed line by as much as 22 feet. And right at that moment, Russia chose to show off its air defense muscle. The Kursuka-4 electronic warfare system surged to full power. A 330-foot-wide electromagnetic energy wave swept across the area, aimed straight at the radio bands used to control drones. On the Ukrainian UAV team's screens, the crisp 1080p video feed dissolved into a blinding blizzard of white noise. The link cut? For a normal drone, that's a death sentence. It will either fall out of the sky or drift aimlessly until the battery dies. But these weren't normal drones. Ukraine's ace wasn't a radio frequency, it was a chip. Hidden inside both the UJ-22 and its FPV children was a customized 2024 AI navigation processor. The instant the radio link went truly dark, the AI chip snapped the drone into full inertial navigation mode. No GPS, no remote control, no lifeline. With solid-state gyroscopes and accelerometers, it kept flying the pre-planned route, calculating every shift in speed and heading moment by moment, using nothing but its own motion through space. You can jam radio waves, but you can't jam the laws of physics. After 68 suffocating seconds of silence, the UJ-22 broke free of the jamming zone. The Ukrainian operator's display flickered, then came back to life. Control was restored, but now the Russians also knew exactly where the jamming had been concentrated. Polar Bear R, realizing he'd been played, immediately ordered the Panzer S-1 batteries to fire blind into the last known position of the decoy. The real chess match was about to begin, and it was time to unleash the hunting dogs. At the 12-mile mark from the target, the UJ-22 played its final move. Two FPV Wild Hornets split formation exactly as scripted, timed down to the second. The first drone took the role of decoy. It shot up to 600 feet and broadcast ghost echoes, drowning the S-4 100 inches, a forest of phantom targets. A thick digital smokescreen choked the processing circuits of a $500 million system, forcing it to waste precious time on things that didn't even exist. The second drone was the executioner. It didn't fly high. It crawled along the ground at 20 feet, hugging the terrain and the snowfall to slip into the radar's blind spot. The target was the transformer station, a lattice of steel and porcelain insulators straining to push electricity through the grid. A 5-pound C4 warhead locked straight onto the main transformer body, the softest point with the most expensive consequences. The oil tank, the radiator banks, the high-voltage bushings, and the control cabinet right beside them. One strike in the right spot, and everything could become a chain flash catastrophe. Oil ignites, breakers trip wildly, voltage collapses on the lines, and the entire station goes dark as if someone snapped its spine. Russian air defenses began to move, but the clock was running too fast. Panzer S-1 roared. Its 30mm cannon spat 5,000 rounds per minute into the blizzard, a desperate rain of bullets raking the sky. On the Ukrainian UAV team's 1080p feed, the whole world shrank into flickering points of light inside the whiteout. And then he was no longer piloting. He was the drone. His thumb snapped the stick. The jolt threw it into a violent corkscrew spiral. G-force smeared the image like freefall on a roller coaster. And the Panzer crew, blind in the storm, fired at false traces and ghost sounds they weren't even sure were real. Their panic was as useless as screaming into fog. "Target locked," the Ukrainian operator whispered. pulse hammering. The transformer station swelled in the frame. Steel fencing, porcelain arrays, taut conductors like guitar strings, and the oil-filled transformer blocks sitting there, massive, expensive, and painfully vulnerable if hit in the right place. In his headset, Bear's crackling shout burst over the net. "It's under the snow! No way!" Russia's radar was being strangled by the storm, swinging a $500 million hammer into empty air. The irony was brutal. While Moscow chased shadows, the FPV slipped in like a thief, stepping through the back door, no noise needed, only timing. 45 seconds to impact. Could Russia stop a drone when they couldn't even see it? The final 45 seconds slipped by like an NBA scoreboard with one possession left, your heartbeat sinking to every tick of the clock, knowing everything can flip in an instant. On the Ukrainian UAV team's monitor in Odessa, the main Melitopol power substation, 180 feet tall, glowed sharp and bright. This wasn't a nice-to-have target. It was a power nerve center feeding streetlights, logistics depots, communications networks, and even the heating system, everything Russia was clinging to in order to keep control moving in winter. On the ground, Pantsir S-1 batteries roared, spitting 5,000 rounds per minute. Tracer lines ripped through the blizzard, whipping across the sky like fire lashes. But Russia's fatal mistake, discounting ultra-low drones and underestimating heavy snow, made the entire fortress start to wobble. Inside the Melitopol command post, Commander Polar Bear R crushed his radio in a white-knuckle grip. His face went pale. "It's flying under the radar curtain. Impossible." A $500 million S-400, a symbol built to swat down even the F-35, was now choking on a tiny FPV Wild Hornet, so small that in a snow whiteout, it looked like a stray bird, except it was charging in at 120 miles per hour. Algorithms tuned to read the most advanced stealth aircraft simply couldn't keep up with a pinprick target carving hard turns inside a white wall of snow. The Ukrainian operator, now only 400 meters from the objective, leaned in over the console. His heart hammered loud enough to feel like it was knocking from the inside. "Fly. You're beautiful," he whispered. Far off, the UJ-22 airborne hovered about 10 miles away. The mother drone, coordinating the package, holding the link, relaying a signal so steady, it made Russia's Krasuka 4 jammers look like they were laughing helplessly. Meanwhile, on the S-400 display, ghost echoes from the decoy FPVs flashed non-stop, turning the sky into a forest of false contacts. The processors began to seize up, forced to decide between countless things that didn't even exist. That proud fortress was about to get a budget haircut courtesy of a drone package worth roughly $20,000. The Pantsir crew broke into sweat like investors staring into a market crash, whipping the turret, hosing 30 millimeters into the blizzard. But the Wild Hornet stayed slick, low, and lethal like a Porsche 911 Turbo S, making those bursts feel pointless. 30 seconds to impact. The operator's thumb danced on the stick, micro-correcting against a 40 miles per hour crosswind. The drone's inertial navigation recalculated constantly like Tesla autopilot rereading the road in the middle of chaotic traffic. Pantsir, despite its ability to track multiple targets, was still being pulled off axis by the decoy's ghosts, while the real threat crawled low beneath the blizzard's white noise. 20 seconds. Bear slammed his fist onto the console, a vodka bottle wobbling beside it. His S-400, worth more than a whole team of Bugattis, was drowning in a sea of fake radar signatures. A digital flock of birds clogged the processing pipeline, dragging the system into a hopeless chase. On Ukraine's screen, the power substation complex swelled, larger steel frames, porcelain insulators, and critical assemblies crisp in 1080p. The data link stayed locked thanks to agile frequency hopping, slipping past every layer of noise. 10 seconds. The operator flipped the arming switch. Time. His jaw clenched, the command came out like a growl. Go! AI snapped the aim point onto the weakest seam of the key assembly. The screen trembled as the drone screamed through the final 100 feet, dodging one last rake of tracer fire like an F1 car threading an S-curve. And then, there was nothing left to dodge. A white flash swallowed the frame whole. A split second later came a roar like the sky tearing in half so heavy it crushed every other sound beneath it. But in Melitopol, the terror wasn't just the blast. It was the moment a substation, the place that had been breathing electricity into the city, was suddenly forced to choke in a single beat. This wasn't a crude act of sabotage. It felt like a physics lesson delivered straight into steel and porcelain insulators. A shaped C4 charge, only 5 pounds, like the energy heart of a high-powered fast-charging station compressed into a metal cone, released its concentrated violence in an instant. The penetrator jet drove into the equipment, slicing through the casing like a hot blade through wax. And then the substation's own nature took over. Insulating oil, arcing, heat, and an electrical fury that fed on itself. A blue-white flare stood up like lightning trapped indoors, followed by the dry crack of breakers and the metallic hiss of something being cooked from the inside out. Superheated oil burst free and caught immediately, and a fireball rose right in the middle of that maze of steel frames and live lines. Within seconds, a sight that should have been nothing but the steady growl of transformers became a red-hot stage, not a methane hell, but a storm of arc light and burning oil, sustaining itself on the very materials meant to keep the power stable. Then, the economic twist arrived in the cruelest way. The light didn't go out only where it burned, it went out across the city. Protection relays tripped, feeders dropped load like dominoes yanked from the base. Parts of Melitopol flickered once, then went dark. Streetlights died first. Then logistics facilities. Then field communications. Then the heating lines that were fighting the winter. What Ukraine hit wasn't just a block of metal. It was the rhythm of operation Russia relied on to hold control. The irony is brutal. Russia wanted a warm winter. Ukraine sent a heat bill written in fire and blackout. No venture capital, no speeches, just one touch in the right place. Bear was thrown back from his chair as the sirens wailed, glass breaking underfoot while boots pounded the floor in panic. And somewhere up the chain, a $500 million S. 400 was made to look helpless by a flying piece of hardware worth maybe $20,000 powerless. Like armor that can stop bullets but leaves the circuitry exposed. The Melitopol substation didn't burn for 3 days like a gas plant. Flames can be contained sooner, but the real damage lasts longer. Replacing equipment, rebuilding connections, and patching a darkness that winter never forgives. Ukraine didn't need to roll tanks into Melitopol to prove power. They chose something colder, smarter, stopping the city's heartbeat. A wave of UAV strikes hit the 330 kilovolts Melitopolskaya substation and nearby facilities, and within moments, most of Melitopol and large parts of Zaporizhia plunged into widespread blackouts. In a winter war, losing electricity isn't losing comfort. It's losing heat, losing water, losing communications, and most of all, losing the feeling that someone is in control. From an economic and infrastructure standpoint, this was the classic cheap but poisonous kind of blow. When the grid collapses, everything that seems minor turns into a domino chain. Hospitals have to strain on generators. Water systems switch to emergency mode. Hundreds of settlements across Zaporizhia and spreading into parts of Kherson were cut off from power, dragging commerce into paralysis. Cold storage, pumping stations, security systems, telecom networks, all gasping at once. And it didn't stop there. UAV debris from interceptions also caused spillover damage to parts of airport areas and warehouses, turning a precise hit into a timely side effect. Russia may have taken this territory, but it couldn't hold the most basic thing: light and warmth. And in the public eye, that becomes an instinctive failure, no analysis required. People simply feel they're living in a place that has been abandoned. But Ukraine's strike didn't stop at civilian life. It aimed straight at military logistics, where Melitopol is treated as a strategic choke point, linking Russian forces from the east toward Kherson and Crimea. The destroyed substation had been a primary power source for military facilities in the area, and when the electricity goes down, logistics don't slow, they clog. Everything that depends on power, communications, maintenance, warehousing, coordination systems gets dragged down all at once. Worse, coordinated strikes on the rail network forced military transport to pause, like yanking the plug from a control center and watching the entire network behind it suddenly freeze. In war, the most frightening thing isn't getting a single depot hit. It's getting your tempo hit, the rhythm that keeps everything else running smoothly. And here's the part that hurts most: politics. Russia can claim it controls Melitopol, but occupation power only truly holds when it can do the minimum: protect infrastructure and basic daily life. When the whole city goes dark, when heating cuts out, when water pressure drops, the promise of security and stability cracks like cheap paint meeting wet snow. In people's minds, one brutally simple, dangerously powerful question appears. If they can't keep the electricity on, what can they keep? That's no longer military, that's trust. Melitopol is occupied, but it's being struck right in the heart, and the feeling of abandonment will erode confidence faster than any propaganda leaflet ever could. In short, the strike on Melitopol substation wasn't just infrastructure sabotage. It was a punch to governing capacity, a break in the breathing rhythm of logistics, and a deep cut into trust inside an occupied city. Russia may hold land with manpower, but to hold people, it has to hold light, heat, water, the most basic things. And when it can't, Ukraine turns Melitopol into a living message. Capturing isn't the same as controlling. So now the question is, where will Ukraine strike next to double the effect? A fuel depot going up in flames? A rail hub paralyzed? Or a logistics command center thrown into chaos? Drop your boldest prediction in the comments. Goodbye!